Hello, my name is Sol Graetz, Graetz. I was born in Omaha, Nebraska, in a little house on 19th and Martha Street, where my folks lived. And the area was, in those days, was called Shealytown. After I had an older sister, Isabel, an older brother, Marion, and a younger sister who also was born on 19th and Martha, Janet. After the tornado of 1913, since we had a rented house, we were forced to leave and move to an area near 33rd and California. Houses were very rare, very scarce at that time, and we lived in the back, in a small house in the back of another house. From 33rd in California, our family, the six of us, my mother, Edith, whose maiden name was Trustin, my father, Leon, we moved to a house on the northwest corner of 33rd and Burt Street, where we lived with my mother's folks and their family. There were 11 of us living in one big house with one bathroom, and I had two maiden aunts who fought over that bathroom many times while their dates waited outside. I started school at Webster Grade School, and I can remember the day in 1917 when my Uncle Harry Trustin walked out of the house, walked down to the corner, got on the streetcar, and was off to World War II. He used to write me letters from France. He was wounded before the armistice, but was in France after the armistice and was in Germany in the Corps of Engineers in the rebuilding. Shortly after the war, we moved to 43rd and Parker Street, which was the first home that my folks had ever owned. And it was quite a move. And for a family of six, it was a wonderful experience growing up on Parker Street. I went to a grade school at Clifton Hill, graduated grade school, went to technical high school and graduated high school. But the growing up years were the most memorable years of my life. Being on this big house on 33rd in California. My grandfather Trustin was a peddler, had a horse, and which he kept, and I can't remember where, but I know that horse was around quite a bit. But I remember many, many happy days there, summer picnics, and especially family. My family was great on getting together. We had many times together. I had big seders together, and the results of growing up in that kind of a family, I think, were very beneficial. After graduating technical high school, I went to work. In those days, when you went to applied at certain places in the city of Omaha, or probably anywhere in the country, once they found you were Jewish, they didn't even submit an application. That's how things have changed through all the years. I did go to work at Nebraska, at State Furniture Company, which was owned by the Brodke brothers. I worked there from 1927, when I graduated high school, until 1943, when I went into the service and was in the service for 6 months. And which time I was discharged because I had 2 children at home, one an infant daughter and our son Martin. Let's see, what else can I tell you about growing up?
Sol, what year were you born?
Oh, I was born October 17th, 1910, in, as I said, in Omaha.
Tell me a little bit about your mother.
My mother, Edith Trustin, was her maiden name. She came here. My grandfather, Martin Trustin, came here shortly after my mother was born in Russia. He came to the United States, but his father-in-law wouldn't let him take his wife and 4 daughters with him to a wasteland. They were going to North Dakota to become farmers at Devil's Lake. Well, after 2 or 3 years in Devil's Lake, they were bankrupt because of salt water. And my grandfather Trustin moved to Chicago, Illinois, where he found employment with a railroad company, and after a few years sent for his family, his wife and their 4 daughters. Lo and behold, the first child born in the United States was a son. That was my Uncle Harry Trustin. They had 2 more daughters, and it was a wonderful family, and we had wonderful times growing up. To skip a little, my father was a traveling salesman who his first job that he told us about was the Armour Meatpacking Company, and he traveled the state of Nebraska selling.
Where did your father come from?
My father was born in New York City. I even have his birth certificate. And his father was born in Germany. My grandmother, my father's mother, was born in England. Her father was born in Holland. And their ancestors came from Portugal. That is on the Graetz side. On the Trustin side, they all came from Russia. Growing up years, we had a wonderful family. As I said, my dad traveled, and my mother looked after the children during the week. And I can remember in the evenings sitting, my mother sat in a chair, and the 4 of us sat around her, and she used to read books to us. It was a wonderful time. But
what other work did your father do after he was finished with Armours?
At one time, he had a children's shoe store on 16th and Farnham Street. But during the Depression, went bankrupt. So he went back to being a traveling salesman. So originally, he had sold Armour's meats, as I said. Then he worked for the American Hand-Sewed Shoe Company, which was a shoe manufacturer based in Omaha. And they were sold out to the U.S. Rubber Company, which at that time was just as big with galoshes and footwear as it was with tires. And he worked for U.S. Rubber Company through World War I, through all those years. My father bought his first Model T in about 1916 or 17 and traveled with his shoe samples loaded in the Model T. He'd go away every Monday, come back on Friday. Sometimes he would come back without his car because it was stuck in the mud somewhere, and he had to come back on a train. But he always brought things on Saturday. We would go downtown, he'd buy us the things we need, bought his cigars, and always bought Mother candy, and always bought Victor Red Seal record, at least one record every Saturday. And I still have the collection of famous artists on Red Seal records, which I have transferred to tape. As I said, the growing up years were wonderful. We were a close family, and with my mother's family and my father's family. I went to, my folks belonged to Temple Israel when we were young, and my grandmother, who lived right across the street from the temple on Park Avenue, always had lunch ready for us after Sunday school. In those days, Temple did not have bar mitzvah, though my father was bar mitzvah at the first Temple Israel on 23rd and Harney Street. But when I believe it was when Rabbi Cohn came to Omaha, they discontinued bar mitzvah and had confirmations. So I was confirmed at Temple Israel. We learned no Hebrew, but we did study the Bible. As I said, I graduated high school, went to worked at the State Furniture Company until I went in service. When I came out of service, I worked for Brodke Jewelry, and for 45 years I was with Brodke's and retired in 1988 when I was 78. Well, what did I do at Brodke's? I started out washing windows and cleaning the floor and learning the business. And when I left, I was an executive officer. I was a buyer, bought watches, jewelry, and many other things. In those days, everything was like dollar down, dollar a week. It was a credit business, and that has changed now. We sold everything from lamps in China to electric tools and whatever. But now the company is a completely diamond jewelry and fine jewelry company, and very proud to have been associated with them. The growing up years, as I said, were wonderful for us.
I'd like to hear a little bit about your siblings.
Well, my older brother Marion, we were not a wealthy family. None of us had gone to college. My older brother Marion and my sister Isabel, who were a year apart in age, a little over a year apart, graduated together at Central High School in 1924 and went to work. And same as I, in 1927, I went to work. But my brother Marion, after working for 6 years, decided he was going to go to university. And he went to Lincoln University and earned a degree in geology, which he pursued, worked for the federal government, and also was in the reserves, was called up in January of 1945 and served 5 years in Richmond, Virginia, in North Africa, and through Italy to France, and back to the States. And had married when he was going to school in Lincoln. He stayed with the Finkelstein family and married one of the daughters, Marjorie. And they had one son, Michael, who is now a rabbi in Omer, Israel. My sister Isabel had one daughter, Judy. Isabel and her husband, Sam Theodore, had moved to California with their daughter, Judy, and Judy was married there and still lives in California. My younger sister, Janet, also went to college and became a school teacher, teaching at the first, in fact, was the principal of the first Underwood High School, which is now District 66. Janet married Sam Barrick of Fremont, Nebraska, who was Mr. Red, White, and Blue, a real patriarch. And Janet raised two children, Jonathan, who is a doctor at UCLA, and Joyce, who lives in Puyallup, Washington. Our children are Martin. Martin went to MIT and was one of 6 young men who built the first computer game, which I was able to play on one of my buying trips to New York. It was called Space Wars, and it was a forerunner of all of these computerized games, but none of the 6 boys ever made a penny off of because they had no idea that that computers were going to. In those days, the computers were from floor to ceiling in a temperature-controlled room, and they had no idea that what would happen to computers. My daughter Annabelle went to Boston University in dramatics, was in a senior play with Faye Dunaway, who was in her graduating class. Esther and I and my sister Isabel went to the graduation exercises in the play. It was a wonderful time. Janice lives in Lexington, Mass, and still interested in music and performing. Our younger daughter, Linda, lives in Waltham, Mass. Linda went to Clark University and gravitated into art and became associated with the Isabel Gardner Art Museum in Boston. And a couple of years ago was named the Art Education of the Year for the state of Massachusetts. Linda is still living in Waltham, and they visit us regularly, and we visit them at least once a year. In today, you're right.
Now we've gotten kind of ahead of ourselves. I want to hear about how you met Esther.
Oh, Esther, it's a short story. As I said, I graduated in 1927, went to work at the State Furniture Company, and succeeded the credit manager there, and worked on in the accounts receivable and accounts payable, became the bookkeeper for the organization. And in 1929, Esther came to work at the same. I saw Esther down there, and I was on a balcony, and I asked Esther for a date, and gradually developed into a good working companionship. We really have enjoyed a wonderful 70 years of marriage, 3 wonderful children, and growing up and looking after the family has been a wonderful experience for us.
Do you remember that first date you had?
I do not remember the first date.
What?
The first date. Do you remember the first date? I don't. It might have been an AZA party. I was big in AZA. My brother was a charter member of AZA, and at one point and was president of AZA Mother Chapter 1, and I later became president of AZA Chapter 1. The first time a brother and 2 brothers had been chapter presidents. I was pretty much reserved, at least I thought, and I can't recall asking Esther for the first date, but somehow I must have. And the relationship just grew. It was a wonderful time. We're married, as I said, in 1934, and we've both lifelong Omahans.
Do you recall anything about your marriage?
Well, the things I recall were the birth of our first son.
No,
of
this
our only
that
son.
came after the marriage.
Oh, you mean
Up to the marriage.
up to the marriage? No, in those days we dated, and we loved to go to Peony Park in the summer for swimming, and on the Saturday nights we had two buddies there. We were a trio. Leo Marks and Martin Falk and Sol Graetz were the three musketeers. We almost constantly dated every Saturday night together, and however, I think I was the only one that married the girl that we dated at that time. Both Leo and Martin dated girls from out of town, married girls from out of town, and I really we had wonderful times. We enjoyed dances, went to a lot of dances, and we just grew up together. And I need a drink of water. I'd like to talk a little bit about growing up in Omaha. The first house I remember is the one on 33rd in California. But when we moved to, on 30th in California, when we moved to 33rd and Burt, I was already, I can recall the winters, the heavy snow, and sliding down Burt Street from 36th Street on a sled that my father built for us. My father was a real handyman. He could build anything. Not only that, he was even a shoe repairman when he was home only on weekends, but he had shoe repair equipment. He would cut the leather and put the soles and heels on our shoes. He was, and he could build anything. He lowered the ceiling in our kitchen on that house and built an archway between the living room and dining room. He was, even though he only had 2 days a week plus vacation time, he was a man do-it-all. In fact, we have pictures of my dad, who also owned one of the early cameras and developed his own pictures back then. So that we have many pictures of our little children, of the 4 children and our mother, and some of our relatives. Going back a little further, as I said, my mother came from Russia, came through Canada to Chicago. My father was born in New York City, came to Omaha when he was 4 years old, in it must have been about 1887, and came with his family and his parents and his grandparents, also an aunt and an uncle who had come here earlier and suggested that the family move from New York to Omaha because of the living. And the story goes that one of his aunts gave him a little gun that he could shoot the Indians with back in those days. My dad said that the Indians would come and sit on the lawn. They didn't bother anyone, but if you brought them food, they would leave. Let's see, what else? else can I remember about those days? Except that our family loved picnics, and I'm trying to remember now.
Where would you go on these picnics?
Most of our picnics were at Hanscom Park, but some of them, the real good ones, were at Lake Manawa and Council Bluffs. We would get on the streetcar, and the whole family, plus my grandparents, and my mother always brought her younger sister, Naomi Trustin Cohn, was always with us. And we had great times. We all made our own home ice cream, and my dad was an expert at that too. He prepared everything, and all we had to do was crank the crank to be sure the ice cream got hard. Let's see, what else can I remember from those days?
When you were in high school, did you have a part-time job?
No, I carried World Herald, before I went to high school, carried World Herald newspaper, but during high school I did not work. I went to Tech High. We lived on 40th, as I said, we lived on 43rd and Parker, and my older sister and older brother went to Central High. They wanted me to go to Central High too, to get a college education. But Tech High was a brand new school, and they had a swimming pool, and the only one in the city. And I loved to swim, and I was able to take swimming lessons as part of my as one of my electives. So I went to Tech High, took bookkeeping and accounting, and had great high school years. I would ride to the streetcar from 43rd down in Parker to 33rd and Burt, but going home I always walked because I had plenty of time going home. The only job I had, except as a real youngster selling Saturday Evening Post and Ladies' Home Journal from house to house, I succeeded my brother who had a paper route, and I took over his paper route when he went to high school, and I carried paper for the World Herald for many years, serving about 150 customers, and I had to do my own collecting. At that time was 15 cents a week. I had one customer who every week gave me 16 cents. I'll never forget him. He was the Walnut Hill feed store on Military Avenue. He sold hay and straw and feed for the farmers in the area.
Do you remember how much money you could earn in a week delivering papers?
As I said, I had over 100 papers, and I think I kept 4 cents out of each, 4 or 5 cents out of each one. So I was earning about $6 a week, and maybe $7 a week. And I gave up the newspapers when I went to high school, but and during high school I didn't work, but I did my last year. I did some part-time work and some night work that the head of the accounting department would get me jobs at people who were doing inventory and that sort of thing. But I went to work right out of high school. What other things?
Do you remember any things in entertainment, like going to the movies during those years?
Oh, yes. In grade school, our 4th grade teacher her name was Helen Bracken, a single woman, and she used to come by with her Nash automobile on Saturdays and take us to the Hamilton Theater to see the movies. And there was the cereal was the biggest thing was the cereal. The features were I don't recall as much as I can recall the cereal, and how at the end of each episode the heroine was left dangling, ready to die, until the hero came and rescued her at the beginning of the next episode.
What did it cost to go to a movie in those days?
A nickel. We went to a movie on Hamilton Street at 40th and Hamilton. It was called the Hamilton Theater. We paid a nickel to get in, and if we were lucky, we had a nickel for popcorn. But then later, when I would go to Sunday school at Temple Israel, and Grandma Graetz and her family lived across the street. I might tell you that my grandfather Graetz died at the age of 57, 2 weeks after I was born. He worked at Brandeis stores in the men's department and died of heart attack on the floor. And Emo Brandeis, who later died in the Titanic, gave, at that time, this was 1910, gave my grandmother a lifetime buyer's card, so that she always received a discount for her family, since she was left a widow with 7 children. In those days, no one knew about life insurance and that sort of thing, but each one of her daughters, not each one, but 2 or 3 of her daughters went to work at Brandeis, where they were able to support the family, along with another daughter who worked for the Nebraska Public Power Company, which later became OPPD. We used to go from Sunday school across to Grandma Graetz's for lunch, and then my folks would come down from home, and we would stay there the whole afternoon and have dinner. And after dinner, they would clear away the dishes. Since there were a lot of daughters, they took care of the dishes. My Grandma Graetz loved to play poker, and she always had guests. They cleared the table, and they played penny poker. And the children, if we were lucky, we got to go over to Leavenworth Street. There were 2 theaters over there, the Apollo, and I can't remember the name of the other. But we used to go over to the movies, and then come back and have dinner at Grandma Graetz's. And she was a wonderful cook, and her daughters were good. One daughter especially made wonderful pastries. And it so happens I was born on my Grandma Graetz's birthday, so I really became a favorite son. And she used to bake every October 17th. We would be there, and she had baked an item that was called butterball. It was like a cinnamon roll, only much better and far richer. Those are just some of the small things that stay in your memory for all those years.
Do you remember Jewish holidays growing up?
Jewish holidays growing up, as I said, we went to Temple Israel until Bethel was organized. Then my folks changed original members of Bethel, along with My Aunt Noam and Uncle Art Cohn and Aunt Bess and Harry Trustin. They were all members of the original congregation. We had no synagogue, and so when Esther and I were married in 1934, we were married by Rabbi David Goldstein, but we had to go to the new Paxton Hotel, which is now the old Paxton Hotel, but it was a brand new building at that time, and we had a wonderful wedding with Esther's father, who was a Malamed and a very, very learned man, and my grandfather Trustin, who was on the under the canopy with Rabbi Goldstein and assisted in the ceremony. We had our honeymoon. We left Omaha, stayed overnight in Des Moines, went on to Chicago at the Edgewater Beach Hotel, which was an outstanding hotel in Chicago. And we still have the receipt for the room, $6 a night. We had a room on about the 7th floor, and we could open the window. There was no air conditioning then, but we could open the window on Saturday night and hear the orchestra playing down below in the open air. Unfortunately, the Edgewater Beach is not there anymore, but it was a wonderful time. And my father let us use his car to drive there, and it was just a great occasion, one that I remember, that the memories will never diminish.
How did your Trustin and your Graetz family end up in Omaha, Nebraska?
My grandfather Trustin came with a group of Russian farmers to Devil's Lake, North Dakota. They went bankrupt there. The Irish banker took over the mortgages and foreclosed the mortgages. And my grandfather went to Chicago, where, as I said, he worked for the union, for the railroad, until he had enough money to send for his family. And my father's sister, my grandfather's sister, married Julius Sherman. We called him Uncle Sudik. And he came to Omaha. When they left Devil's Lake, he went to Minneapolis, but came to Omaha for the Trans-Mississippi exhibition because he was a specialist in mirrors, and he built a lot of mirrors for the buildings, and sent to my grandfather in Chicago saying, "You should come to Omaha, there's a lot of opportunity here." And that brought them to Omaha, the Trans-Mississippi Exposition. And the family grew up in Omaha. Uncle Harry became a member of the city council, was very active in the American Legion, and was, in fact, at one election in about 1936, I believe, Uncle Harry was the largest vote getter in the city of Omaha for the city commission, led all of the seven commissioners, but turned down the job of mayor because he wanted to be in the public works department, which was, as an engineer, was his field.
You remember the holidays, the Jewish holidays growing up?
the holiday that I remember growing up, Jewish holidays, for instance, on Rosh Hashanah, we would go to Temple Israel, and when I was young, and as I said, Rabbi Cohen had, or one of his predecessors had abolished the bar mitzvah, and the temple was a very staid congregation. The ushers wore morning coats. The services were not too long. After services, my sister and brother and I would walk down to 18th in Chicago, where my grandfather Trustin was observing the holiday, and we would visit him downstairs and my grandmother upstairs, and it was a great time to be growing up. We never even thought of walking a distance from 29th and Park Avenue to 18th and Chicago, which was his synagogue, and then walking back to my grandmother's. But the best times, of course, were Passover. We would have Seder at our house on 33rd Street, and my grandfather Trustin would be the leader of the Seder, and we by then had a big family, and it was a big table, and we had a lot of singing, and as I didn't know Hebrew, but I tried to be as attentive as possible. My Uncle Harry Trustin and a cousin of mine, Jules Slavin, who were about the same age, always had plenty of fun because there was wine to drink, and it made them very, very happy. But those days were the growing up years, and sitting at Seder with my grandfather and grandmother, and our family and my mother's family was a wonderful experience. I can even remember one time when my Aunt Frida Trustin married Jack Bramson, whose father was a rabbi and also a shochet. And he was, in fact, the Reverend Bramson was probably the first Orthodox rabbi in Omaha. He came here in the late 19th century. But he was Litvisha. He sat at one end of the table. My grandfather's Trustin sat at the other end, and they each conducted their own Seder, while everybody in between was just having fun. It was a memorable time. But as I said, the holidays were the Passover Seder was the holiday that stays in your mind so much because of the celebration.
Let's talk a little bit about the years about this time, since your retirement. What have you been doing to keep busy?
As I said, I retired in 1988. I was 77 years old, but I kept working because I loved to work, and I loved the jewelry business. After retirement, I became a volunteer with AARP, doing tax work for the people at no charge. we're supposed to take only customers, clients who were senior citizens and couldn't really afford to pay a paid preparer for the services because they had become so expensive. But I worked with AARP for 18 years. In fact, last year was the last year. I will not be working for them this year. But I just received a certificate for 18 years of service. I also worked at Swanson Library with Friends of the Library, sorting books, stockpiling, assisting at the book sales, and anything that had to be done that I could do. That's about the sum of my volunteerism, but I enjoyed helping people with their taxes, and I got many of them, mostly women, single women, who would call back the following year and say, "Are you going to do my taxes this year?" And I would always have to say, "Well, you'll have to make an appointment," because I also worked at the AARP office, setting up appointments for the different volunteers. We had across the city, we had a little over 40 volunteers. And I worked mainly at the American Legion Club on 78th and Cass, and filled in at other spots around the city whenever I was able. As I said, I also manned the phone at the AARP office, setting up appointments and answering questions about taxes. What else should I? Other than that, when I retired, I bought my first computer, an IBM PC-1, which is now retired because my son replaced it with the one that he had designed, and which I still use. And I love to work on a computer. I love getting email from friends and family and answering them and keeping in touch. It's my biggest problem is I'm addicted to a solitaire game, which is a game of skill, not one of luck. It's called, what's it called? What's that solitaire called? I can't even think of the name now. But it occupies some of my spare time. Unfortunately, last month I had developed a health problem, had to go to the hospital for 5 days, but was released, and I'm still recuperating from that. But hopefully, in fact, I feel better just talking than I do sitting around and not doing anything. But it gives me a lift. What else can I talk about? Now, I want to close by saying how much I love my wife, Esther, and how much I love my children, Martin, Annabelle, and Linda. I do not have a message to give you right now, but when the time comes, you'll find an envelope in my file, which you know where it is, along with my will and their family trust, and you'll be able to open it. I can't recall what I've written in it, except to let you know that I love you and have enjoyed watching you grow up, becoming adult citizens, fine citizens, trustworthy, and really good American citizens, which I hope you will remain for the rest of your lives.